your spiritual life. In spite of all this, actual spiritual life is very simple. To realize the God hidden within me, hidden within all, we just try to realize it. It's a simple matter. But if somebody questions you, is it worthwhile doing it? You have no answer. You want somebody else to answer. That philosophy comes in. They answer. They silence all these critics so that your little faith is not disturbed. That is what India did with respect to philosophy. To strengthen your faith, to make you convinced that you are on the right path, so that nobody can shake you thereby. With this tremendous strength behind, you can go ahead. Simple spiritual life you can do. You don't need all the scholarship. But if ever you need to protect yourself against attack from others, saying what fools you are, going to worship, going to meditation, what is all this nonsense, then you will be able to answer so that you can protect yourself or take the help of philosophy to protect you. Sri Ramakrishna puts it in a beautiful saying. To kill oneself, a penknife is enough. To kill others, you need bombs and guns and all this. So if you want to convince others, you need all this. If you want only to realize your own truth, you don't need all this. Simple faith is quite enough. So faith got trust and strengthened by a tremendous philosophical tradition. That is Vedanta. That's why with this Advaita Vedanta behind, all the Bhakti religions can go on functioning without any difficulty. These are all various paths to that realization. But the strength comes from this tremendous philosophy. And that greatness of that philosophy, which discovered the unity behind all this diversity, the unity of Brahman, the unity of the Atman. There is no diversity in the Atman or Brahman. These diversity is only name and form. All these various ideas are presented to strengthen our faith in that wonderful devotion to something beyond this world of sensory experience. There is a profound world of the unseen behind the world of the seen. That is what religion means. That religion needs to be strengthened by scientific thinking. That scientific thinking is what Vedanta gives to all people in the West today. We can't preach straight away religion. You have to give this philosophy first. Then only they understand, yes, there is something called religion, a spiritual striving. Then they seek it. Otherwise, their mind is disturbed by modern scientific criticisms of religion, social criticisms of religion. Just like Marx said, opium of the people. Religion is opium of the people. Much of it is true. It has functioned as opium also. But it is not all that of religion. Similarly, it is mere primitive superstition. That also has been told. Primitive people have religion. Why do you want religion? You don't want all this. Even in the questions asked in the Madras meetings, these questions came. Why do we want all this at all? We can live as we are doing. Just go ahead, that's all. Why go in for spiritual life? This question came. It's good that we put this question. The only country where these questions are never silenced, they are given answers as best as possible, is this country, India. And that it could do so because of this Mount Everest standing behind all the various religious movements in the country. That is Vedanta. Therefore, this Shankara's language, original Sanskrit itself is there. In one place he says, he tried his best to convince the logician that your logic has no function dealing with the unity of experience. When everything is one, there is no logic. If there is two, only logic can come in. This he said repeatedly. Again and again they will bring forth, we are great logicians, we controvert this, etc. And he said, Aho, alas, wonderful, Aho, Anumana Kaushalam, Darshitam. You have shown tremendous capacity for inference. Who are you? I say, Apucha Shringaihi Tartika Velivardaihi. You are the bulls of logicians, only lacking in tail and horns. Otherwise, you are just a bull, going about, I can do this, I can do that. That is all. This subtlety of thought you miss. You are good in dealing with words, dealing with concepts. Beyond concept, you can't understand at all. So the language, Aho, Anumana Kaushalam Darshitam. You have shown Anumana Kaushalam, inference capacity. Who are you? Apucha Shringa says, Apucha Shringaihi Tarka Shardula Belivardaihi. The bulls of logician, Belivardai is a bull. Tarka Belivardaihi. Apucha Shringaihi. No Pucha, no Shringa. Tail and horn missing. Bakir, all the rest, you are like a powerful bull. You are moving about like this, like that, he said at that time. Then later, he said in the same context, in one beautiful sentence you will find there in Sanskrit, when the logician finds distinguishing characteristics in the ether, in space, then only will he find such characteristics in the self. In the self, you cannot find any kind of distinguishing characteristics, and logic needs a distinguishing characteristic to deal with the subject. If you want to make an inference, the common inference they give in logical deduction is the Parvato Vanniman. There is fire in the mountain. I have not seen fire. I am inferring fire. How do you do so? Dhumat. I find smoke there. Why? How do you come to that conclusion? A general knowledge. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. Therefore, there also fire is there. This kind of logical inference. Now you need one or two characteristics separating this item from other items to be able to make an inference. In the Atman, there is no such characteristic. So also in ether, there is no characteristics. So he said, when the logician finds distinguishing characteristics in the ether or in space, then only will he find such characteristics in the self. For not even hundreds of logicians, he is telling, not even hundreds of logicians who admit differences in the self, owing to limiting adjuncts, owing to the body. There is one Atman in me, one Atman in you. Why I say there is different Atman? Because there is one in you, there is one in me. But it is due to the limiting adjunct. We can make multiples out of it because of the limiting adjunct. One sun is shining in a pot of water. If you put 1,000 pots of water, there will be 1,000 suns there. It doesn't make for 1,000 suns there. Only the manifestations are so many. Name and form making all this difference. He had argued all this earlier. So he says, then only even hundreds of logicians who admit differences in the self, owing to limiting adjuncts, can show any characteristic of it that would lead one to infer differences between oneself and another. Absolutely, you cannot find a single such characteristic to show differences between self and the other. Consciousness is always a singular. This is the logic, it's a higher logic. It is this higher logic that was referred to by Schrödinger, the nuclear scientist, that consciousness is a singular, of which the plural is inconceivable. If you do find a plural, it is due to the Indian Maya, that deception by which one appears as many. Really, there is no difference at all. Neha nanasti kinchana. There is no difference here. Absolute unity is behind this whole universe, and that is the direction towards which all science is going. What is that one from which the many have come? That is a great search in scientific investigation. So he said, and so far as natural differences are concerned, they are out of the question, for the self is not an object of inference. See the language. The self is not an object of inference. I wish all of us understand this simple, subtle logic at that high level. Now, when I say anything about some object, that thing is white, this thing is black, I am making a judgment. I see the difference. This is different from that. There is a characteristic point which makes it different from this. If all were white, I would have no judgment at all. But because there are differences, white, not so white, etc., you can make a logical judgment. So in this way, when you make a judgment, where is the Atman? When I make a judgment about the world, the Atman is the self. And when you make a judgment about the Atman, what happens to the Atman? He ceases to be the object of your inference. He becomes the perceiver of your own judgment. He is the self behind the man who is speaking this and that. He is not an object. Eternal subject is the Atman. So it becomes the self, never the not self. Always Drik, never the Drishyam. That is why when Julian Huxley wrote about message of the Upanishads to me in his letter, criticizing and appreciating, etc., I replied to this one question. The God preached by Vedanta cannot be established by logic or demolished by logic as well. It is something wonderful because it is the subject behind all affirmation and negation. When I say A exists, I posit A. At that time, the Atman is the seer, the eternal self, the Sakshi, the witness. When I say A does not exist, then also the Atman is the seer. The Atman is never said as not existing or existing. Both these judgments do not touch the Atman, which is always the seer of the judgment and not judgment itself. That shloka comes in the Viveka Chudamani. I quoted this because he had said that God in this modern world has become the fading, fast fading smile of a cosmic Cheshire cat. That's the English expression. A cosmic Cheshire cat smiled or grinned and disappeared. The grin remained for some time. When the cat goes, it cannot remain longer. That you think it is there. That is your imagination. There is no cat at all. Only. So, a cosmic Cheshire cat's grin. So, I quoted his own sentence. You have said so. That criticism cannot touch truth or God as presented in Vedanta. Here is wonderful expression given by Shankaracharya in the Viveka Chudamani. I am giving you that shloka. Astiti pratyayo yascha nastiti vastuni buddhereva vikareto natu nityasya vastunah. The affirmation that God is, the negation that God is not. Do not touch God at all, because it is eternal self behind all affirmation and negation. That's the language. Wonderful point for thinking. The great scientists today understand the meaning of this wonderful point made by Shankara. Such a subtle thinking is there in that the thinker is not an object of thought. It is the thinker, ever the self, ever the, because a thing cannot change its nature. If it is a thinker, it is a thinker. You think it is not so, that is your wrong understanding. And so, if fire is not hot, something is wrong with it. Actually, fire is hot. It is determined so by scientific investigation. A thing cannot change its nature. The Atman is consciousness, always the seer. Therefore, it can never become an object of seeing. It is never the object, ever the subject. That's the language I used earlier, quoting from that book, Drik Drishya Viveka. Discrimination between the seer and the seen, the observed and the observer. And that word observer is coming prominently in physics today. The power, the part played by the observer in the production of knowledge in the nuclear field. So these are all very much interesting to Western scientists today. We have done this ages ago, this very subtle thinking, and gone beyond this world of duality, that infinite one and no two. Ekameva. Ekam is not enough. Ekameva. One alone. Even that is not enough. Advayam Brahma. Advitiyam Brahma. No two. No two. The word Advitiyam means no two. To affirm that once again. Ekameva. Advitiyam Brahma. Neha nanasti kinchana. Really no separation of things here in this world. We see differences. Really it is not different. Everything is one. So when you go to the nuclear field, all these differences vanish. You see beautiful things on the surface of the world experience. But go to the nuclear field, it's nothing but mere energy. Just a dance of energy, nothing else is there. All the sweetness of sugar, the beauty of a particular flower, all these things do not exist there. All this only in the surface experience. The molecular level, you see them. Deeper level, you don't see them. You see only one infinite ocean of energy. Nothing but these are merely waves, that ocean of energy. That is what Vedanta describes this universe. Waves in the infinite ocean, which is my true nature. I am that infinite Atman, infinite Brahman. All this universe is only a few waves in that infinite ocean which I am. Now this is the sentence in most audacious Vedanta book, Ashtavakra Gita. There he says, Mai Ananta Mahambodhau Bahudha Vishwavichayah Udyanti Ghanti Khelanti Pravishanti Subhavataha. See the audacity of this wonderful utterance. In that infinite ocean of pure existence which is myself, I am that infinite ocean of pure existence. Ananta Mahambodhau. Infinite ocean. What kind of ocean? Bodha, of nature of consciousness. In that wonderful ocean, a few waves rise and play and go. That is called this universe. The vast immensity of the universe, what are they? A little bubble in the infinite ocean which I am. What a tremendous height man is taken to in his true nature. Outwardly is a petty little thing here. But there is something profound in you that they repeat again and again. Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi. You are that, you are that. If a man can do robbing a few pies, what a petty mind he has. For a few pies he can rob, give up his own self-respect, etc. It is true. It doesn't know his own value. We value things more than oneself. Vedanta reverses it. You are the center of all value. Other values are derived values from you. If you are not there, where is value for them? If all the wealth that is in the house is there, and yet there is nobody in the house, all are dead and gone, where is the value? Because there is somebody, it is value. That we forget. But the center of value, man himself. If man is not there, there is no value. Like we say, money. What is the value of money? Value is only of things which are useful to you. Food, shelter, clothing, these are value. Money has no value. Currency note has no value. You may have an infinite number of currency notes. Food is available in the market. What is that money for? We are understanding these things deeper and deeper today. We thought all money is in the notes. Let us put all the notes and keep them and very happy we are. No, absolutely no value there. It is only when it can satisfy the craving of a particular person that money has a value. Otherwise it is absolutely no value. That's why we say, even if you burn away about 10 million rupees one day, the country never becomes poorer, except a little paper we lost, that's all. Actual value is not lost. But things should not be destroyed. They are actually things of value, which can utilize them to satisfy the craving of a person, an individual. This is a great dictum. Today they understand it in the Western thought. We had it in Shankara's time and earlier. Samhatanam pararthatvat purushasya. Everything that is a samhata means a compound. Anything which is a compound, that means many items put together is called a compound. A table is a compound. So many parts of wood put together is called a table. Now all these samhatas, including society, politics, everything, these have no value in themselves, is the language. Samhatanam, where is artha? Pararthatva. They subserve the interest of somebody else. Who is that somebody? A purusha, a human being. Some human being or some living being whose desire is satisfied through this item, that item has a value. Otherwise it has no value at all. That's the language used then. Samhatanam pararthatvat purushasya. So when we forget this intrinsic value of man himself, we become subject to all the pressures of the world outside and think they are all high value. I have no value. I am nothing. I am nothing. The world is everything. Then we become absolutely a slave in this world. There is no freedom of man in that way. The mukti, which Vedanta speaks of, is that mukti. You are supreme. Things are nothing compared to your own infinite dimension. That you realize. Then you can handle things as a master and not as a slave. Vivekananda put this idea, therefore, before people. Deal with the world as a master and never as a slave. Be free, be free, be free. What a beautiful idea. If you want to love somebody, be free, free to love. Don't love because somebody forces you to do. What's the funny thing? Be free, azad, 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 repeatedly. Vivekananda said, that's Vedantic teaching. So rescuing man from subordination to things, that is Vedanta. And all religion belongs to that category. Vedanta sustains this religion because it does this great work to rescue man from slavery to things. Real freedom comes only when you are truly independent of things. More dependence on things, that means more bondage. That bondage must go. And the definition of freedom again and again is given in Vedanta. And today I was reading biology. Julian Huxley's big volume, about 700-page book, Evolution, a New Synthesis. A very comprehensive study of evolution. Toward the end, it deals with progress in evolution, concept of progress in evolution. And he says there, the progress of evolution is measured in terms of the independence of the environment by the organism. See the wonderful language. When the organism becomes independent of the environment, then there is progress. An average insect or any other low-level creature is entirely dependent upon the environment. As you rise up the evolutionary scale, you find more independence coming. And when you come to man, a good deal of independence has come. We can alter our own situation, alter the nature around us. We can do so. To that extent, we say there is progress. Progress is not a scientific concept. But Huxley says, when you deal with evolution, the word progress comes again and again. Some insects had some strength to continue its life against all the pressures from outside. To that extent, it is free. And as you rise up, that freedom comes more and more. In man, there is the greatest possibility of freedom, as much as what biology can sanction for you. Rest of it is what Vedanta will give you. Biology leaves you there. Here is Vedanta takes you up. What is the nature of that freedom? Here is the shloka in Vedanta. In Huxley's book, you can put the shloka and find it absolutely correct in dealing with progress in evolution. He says, Sarvam Paravasham Dukkham, Sarvam Atmavasham Sukham, Iti Vidyat Samasena Sarupam Sukha Dukkhayoham. Please understand, true nature of Sukha and Dukkha, happiness and misery. Always self-dependence is happiness. Any dependence on external factors is misery. It is bondage. This is the only thing. Now, biology is sustaining this idea, confirming this idea, that as you go up in the evolutionary scale, you find greater control of the environment and greater independence in the environment. Both go side by side. We have less interest in the environment. We can create our own environment. If it is very hot, we know how to make an air conditioner. We don't care what the heat will be. We can condition ourselves. To that extent, we become free. No animal can do it. And so, this kind of freedom can continue. That comes to moral, spiritual life. Because this very man, as a biological creature, he is free from external environment. But he is subject to the pressures of the sensory system and the sensory world around. He has become a slave to his sensory system. Where is freedom there? Absolutely no freedom at all. And such situations are pictured in wonderful language, poetic, artistic, in our literature. Such a human being, though he can become free, he doesn't exercise that freedom. He becomes a slave to a certain temptation here and there. They are described as the bullocks whom you tie with a ring on the nose and a thread, and the boy is taking it here and there. That man is like that bull. Absolutely. This nature can pull him this way, that way, anywhere. He has no independence to say no. That is the picture they give of that type of human being. Only religion can give you that teaching. No other scientific system can give you this freedom of man from petty little attractions here and there. That is your so-called freedom. Wonderful. In many books you will find this idea of real freedom is freedom from all these pressures of external life and the sensory system. Then, with that freedom, live, enjoy. That is the message that the Upanishad is coming from Isha Upanishad, the first opening verse. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. Enjoy this world through that spirit of renunciation. Through tyaga, enjoy this world. That is a wonderful teaching. Gandhiji, Tagore, all of them were highly inspired by that single line. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kinjat jagatyam jagat. The whole world is full of the divine, that Brahman. In every particle you'll find the presence of Brahman. With this understanding, practice that kind of renunciation, which is not Brahman you renounce. Then you are free. You are free. Enjoy life. Bhunjita, bhunjita. Live in zest in this world. But in the sense of detachment, this spirit of renunciation, you can enjoy the world fully thereby. So this is how the Upanishadic message goes to people, and such a message is assailed by various systems. Any worldly thought will assail this system. That is how atheism in India is different from atheism in the West today. Our atheism became Epicureanism. What do you call Epicure? Epicure was a Greek thinker or a Roman thinker. Simply eat and drink and be merry. Nothing else to do in this world. That kind of very crude type of materialism was preached by Indian atheism. Therefore, they are always considered as Epicurean. We don't want that philosophy in this country. You enjoy the world, but with a spirit of detachment, with understanding. Don't become a crude materialist. The Western people appreciate that. We don't want crude materialism. There's a refined materialism. That is what we seek for. In that way, to them comes this philosophy. Why should you do so? Because the value that is within you is infinite compared to value run after the world. That is absolutely inferior. This is superior. That is a great truth, that things are not so important as the person whose service that thing is meant for. That a child needs a shirt. That shirt is important because it serves the child. By itself it has no value. Therefore the child is the central value and not the shirt. Therefore all humanity must realize this truth, says the Upanishad. If somebody comes to criticize, Upanishad has to use arguments, discussions, logic. That's what he did. And in this wonderful teaching, that infinite oneness behind this world of multiplicity, which is simply a very puzzling experience. Everything is different, everything. A baby looking at the world, everything is different, full of differences, puzzle. Then out of that, it creates knowledge. a little unification of experience begins, and is classify, these are all one class. Classification itself is unification. When you classify things, you unify things. They're all different cows. Class called cow. Class called, the child will say this is a cow. Another cow, that is also cow. It has already found class value in the mind. Unification has come. Individual items become unified in class as well as in genera. That is how the mind grows from the particular to the general, finally to the universal. That's what Vedanta speaks of. The universal is the infinite Atman, one and non-dual. That is the great teaching. And so, lastly, the sentence says in the same discussion, this great teaching of the unity of Brahman, unity of that spiritual awareness, infinite and non-dual. This wonderful teaching cannot be assailed by any logic or any logician. That sentence is put here in a wonderful Sanskrit sentence. Tasmat, he says. Yes. Tarkika. Shada, Pada, Raja, Apravesyam. This unity of Brahman is a secure fortress, Durgam, the word used, is a secure fortress, impregnable to those logicians who have no discipline to understand the higher levels of life and thought. The language used here, the English translation says here, yes, Upanishads, position we admit, this unity, Shastra Guru Prasad. Unless we have spiritual discipline, we won't understand this truth of the unity of the self. These people have no such thing, only based on mere intellectual scholarship. How can they understand? So he said, this is a Durgam, a tremendous fort, unassailable by the armies of logicians from here and there attacking it. And you can see it all through history, that we have a wonderful school called Nyaya. First Vaisheshika, then Nyaya. Vaisheshikas are scientists. What you call positivistic? Physicists, etc. They divided the world into various categories, elements, etc., etc. Called Vaisheshika. We began with that. Then went to Nyaya. Tremendous logic, playing with thought, inferences, etc. Nyaya. Then later on came Sankhya, a deeper approach, psychology, studying the human mind, its functioning, etc. Much deeper than mere physics. This deal only with the waking state. But when you study mind, you go waking, dream, and other states also. So you come to Sankhya. Then you rise to Mimamsa, ritual, ceremony, with a little spiritual inclination, mostly heaven-based. That is a later institution. Then came finally Vedanta. This Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa, two Mimamsas. One is ritual, that is philosophy and spirituality. That's Vedanta. Now in this Vedanta you find, when Vedanta came, Shankaracharya expounded it all over the country. What happened? All these Vaisheshikas, all the Nayayikas, even the Sankhyas, all became Vedantins automatically. There is nobody representing Vaisheshika philosophy today. Nobody representing Nayayika philosophy. Nayayika scholars are there. Schools of Nyaya are there. In Bengal there is Navya Nyaya. Last century earlier, developed Navya Nyaya, the new logic, as it is called. That is there. But they are all Advaitins. They are all Shankaracharya's followers. No school called Nyaya, no school called Vaisheshika, etc. That is what happened to this wonderful Advaita. He could take in all this. If you say you are wrong, he will say, you are needed for that particular purpose. Don't take it further. You cannot take us to the ultimate. That is something higher. In this way, the various schools of thought found a place in India, and Vedanta showed them their own review, their own relevance in various aspects of life. That is the meaning of this particular sentence. And he said, these ancient logicians, modern scientific logic, they cannot touch this Vedanta because it is like a fortress, secure against all such assault. That is the language he has used here. And today, any scientific thinker, when he studies the Upanishad, he will say he's right. This is a wonderful truth. Nobody can assail it. It can stand four square. It can stall intellectual challenges. That is India's greatness. The great sages were men of high intelligence. Krishna, tremendous intellect. Then comes Shankaracharya. Buddha, tremendous intellect ever. Today also Vivekananda, plenty of intellect. We have strengthened religion with intellect. But we never said religion is based on intellect. Intellect has to be transcended. It is experience. But intellect is needed to protect you from all sorts of attacks here and there. That is why Vivekananda used the language. Intellect is a street cleaner, he said. It doesn't give you any experience. Only it cleans the street, then go ahead. You will have your experience thereby. Clear your roadway, mental roadway through intellect, then go ahead. That go ahead is not intellectual work. It is your own feeling, emotion, everything will come into the play and experience itself. Anubhava is the language used there. So here, Atman is Anubhava Swarupa, of the nature of Anubhava, experience. You cannot make it this and that. Not this experience or that experience. It is experience itself. Anubhava Swarupa is Brahman. And the Sutra Bhashya, introduction, he concludes in this wonderful sentence. He says, Atmaikatva Vidya Pratipattaye Sarve Vedanta Arabhyante. All Vedantas are there to take you towards that Atma Ekatva Pratipatti, unification of all experience in the Atman, one and the three, absolutely that. That's the end of all this development. Similarly also, no intellectual disquisitions can take you to the ultimate truth, because it is only Anubhava Surupatvat, Anubhava Avasanam, Brahma Vijnanam, Shankara said, the Sutra Bhashya. Brahma Vijnana, knowledge of Brahman, finds consummation in the experience of Brahman. Otherwise it's only temporary knowledge, relative knowledge, logical knowledge. But it must find expression in the experience of Brahman. So all over India, we revere the saints who do not speak the language of mere intellect. They speak from experience. Kabir, for example, he speaks from experience. Mirabai, or experience. The Shaiva saints, Vaishnava saints, from experience. Even up to this time, it's the same story. And great mystics in Christianity, they also speak from experience. The Sufis, they speak from experience. Ramakrishna used to love a particular song sung by Vivekananda, Urdu song, a Sufi mystic song. Jo kuch hai so tu hi hai. Whatever there is, it is all thou, O Lord. Jo kuch hai so tu hi hai. I tried, I understood, I went here and there, but wherever I went, jahan mein dekha, tujhe nazar aaya. Wherever I looked, I saw you only everywhere. Jo kuch hai so tu hi hai. It's a famous song you get in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. A mystic can understand that statement. You can't put it in logical formulation. When you put it logically, it just breaks down. Logic breaks down. That remains untouched, uncaught in the web of logic. So, after speaking like this, in this section, section 1 we studied, of the second book of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we enter into section 2. Section 2, section 3, section 4. 3 small sections are here. Then you come to a wonderful passage. The dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi. That's a famous passage in this Upanishad. In between comes these 2-3 small sections where, as I said last Sunday, the language is ununderstandable. Just like to an average student, if you say Einstein's formula for nuclear energy, simply sound that's all. Doesn't mean E equals mc squared. Similarly here also, language is symbolic. Unless commentary explains it, we cannot understand. I give you the example of this in this second section. Shankara comments upon it saying, we told you the Atman is Satyasya Satyam, truth of truth. What is Satyam? Pranavai Satyam, all these pranas, all energies. The whole universe is a play of energy. That is Satyam. And this is the Satyam of that Satyam. That's how Atman was presented in the previous verse. Now Shankara says, in these 2-3 small chapters, the Upanishad is dealing with this Satyam, this world of prana, the cosmos, how it is organized, how it has been evolved in this various directions. Now there you'll get only just rough kind of statements. Detailed statements you get in modern astronomy, modern cosmology, you get plenty. From physics, we rise up to what you call physical astronomy. That's what you get today. But broad ideas you get here. These are all relative. Relativity is the word used. Satyam, the word of relativity is called Satyam. And it's all nothing but energy, the dance of energy. That's all that one. It has got 2 aspects, with form, without form. Gross and subtle. These aspects are there. All these are put here in such a very difficult language. I'll just give you the translation and see what it means. You will not make anything. He who knows the calf with its abode, calf, cow's child, calf, its special resort, its post, and its tether, kills his 7 envious kinsmen. This is the language. Profound meaning is there, but in language it is just like this, and Upanishad gives you the answer. Shankara says, he who knows the calf with its abode, special resort. Who is this? What is that? He kills his 7 envious kinsmen. What are they? Kinsmen are of 2 kinds, Shankara says. One who is envious of you, one who is not envious of you. 2 types of kinsmen are there. Even then, it is symbolic. It's not actually your kinsman, as you will see later on. There. What are they? The 7 organs. They are the instruments for perceiving objects. They are your kinsmen within this body system. There is number 1. Because they turn his vision from the self to the sense objects. Envious kinsmen are those who make you turn from the Atman to the world outside. They are your envious kinsmen. The others are not so harmful. Among these, the sensory system belongs to the category. They pull the mind towards the external objects. It is also said in the Kathopanishad that the sensory system of man has been created with an initial defect that is always outgoing, never ingoing. He cannot go inward at all. That is his original defect. That also he has said earlier. So, the calf, this self within, the prana, the energy, the entire energy system in the body, and then the sensory systems that are there, the 7 envious kinsmen. This is the child. What is the child? Prana, the vital force that is there. It is tied to a post. Body is the post. And the food that you take is what gives strength to the prana. Prana cannot function unless you supply it with food. So that is the post to which the calf is tied. The whole thing is symbolic, but its profound meaning is given there. After what is art is symbolic. Art itself is symbolic. So that here is a symbolic way of expressing a profound truth. Even in our Puranas we will find Shiva dancing. What a wonderful symbol. Dancing Nataraja. We held it with the greatest veneration. And today a scientist comes and says that represents the whole aspect of particle physics. The whole range of particle physics represented by Shiva, says Kapra in his Tao of Physics, with a photo of Nataraja also in the book. So here you can see tremendous creation, destruction. The dance of Shiva is going on, creating, destroying the universes every second. That's language he uses. So a symbolic, which we understand today, has a tremendous meaning. We kept it close to our hearts, not fully understanding what it meant, except some spiritual attitude which gave us towards religion. Now we understand it has thought value also. Tremendous ideas are coming out of it by today's nuclear science. Yes. So this is one aspect of it, and the next sloka says here. Another one is much more difficult. I am only putting 1 or 2 which are very difficult, and it is symbolic. Yeah. Tadesha shloko bhavati. There is a shloka in connection with this. The shloka says, you can't make anything out of it, but as soon as the explanation comes, everything is so beautiful. It says, Arvag bilasaschanasa urdha buddha tasmin yasho nihitam vishwarupam tasya asatha rishaya saptatire vagashtami brahmana sanvidana. That is the text. Translation. Regarding this, there is this verse. There is a bowl that has its opening below and bulges at the top. There is a bowl, like this, a bowl. Various kinds of knowledge have been put into it. 7 sages sit by its side, and the organ of speech, one organ is organ of taste, and the other organ is organ of speech, though the same instrument, organ of speech, which has communication with the Vedas. That is the 8th. Now, what is this bowl? Upanishad itself explains what exactly is this bowl. This bowl that is opening below, bulges at the top, is this head of ours. This is that bowl. It has opening mouth here, and here it is all covered. That is the bowl, it says. Is this head of ours. It is the bowl that has to opening below. That various kinds of knowledge have been put in it. Refers to the various organs. Through sense organs you get all the knowledge of the world. They are all put here. I said last Sunday that we had made a mistake in our thinking that the heart is the center of knowledge. No, here you find it is corrected. We had the concept that head is the center of knowledge. All experiences come from there. Heart has one function. Feeling function is there because heart is very sensitive to all types of emotional situations of the human being. But this idea that brain is the center of knowledge, both lower brain and higher brain, you get in this particular statement here. 7 sages sit by its side. Who are the 7 sages? They are the organs, sense organs are there. They are indeed organ of speech, which is communication of the Vedas. The speech is what brings you the knowledge of the Vedas. All knowledge comes through speech. When man started speaking, he became a student of knowledge. Before that, there is no knowledge, only instinctive behavior, any animal. So speech is the first great capacity that brought man into the world of knowledge, and all progress started thereby. So Vak is highly respected in India, and Saraswati is the goddess of speech. Vak Devi, we call Saraswati. So Vak is highly commended. Control the speech, make it clean, make it pure. It is Saraswati's own organ of expression. That's how we speak about this. And who are these 7 sages? Very interesting. These, we have got Saptarshis in our Puranas. Atri and all these various 7 sages are there. So there are 2 sages and 2 ears, 2 nostrils. These are all sages. Sages means through whom you get knowledge. So symbolically they use this word. They are all sages. Sapta Rishaya says. Brahmana Nihitam Vishwarupam Urdhavutna. Shankara's commentary will make it. Regarding this subject, there is the following verse. There is a bowl that has its opening below. Now the Shruti explains the mantra. What is that bowl? This head of ours. For it is shaped like a bowl. How? For it has opening below, the mouth standing for this opening, and bulges at the top, the head, because of its round shape, answering to the description. Shankara's commentary is going on. Various kinds of knowledge have been put into it, just as the soma juice is put in a bowl. Similarly, here also, various knowledge is put here. The organs, such as the ear, and the vital force, the prana, which is distributed among them in 7 forms, represent various kinds of knowledge, because they are the cause of the perception of sound, touch, etc., etc. These are the things that help us to know the world, to experience the world. So they are called various sages of knowledge are there. This is what mantra says. 7 sages sit by its side. What are they? This portion of the mantra refers to the sense organs. The organ of speech, which has communication with the Vedas, is the 8th. The reason for this is given because the organ of speech is the 8th and communication with the Vedas. There's capacity for that. Veda in the sense of knowledge. All world of knowledge we could achieve by 2 things. 1, capacity for speech communication. 2nd, capacity to confront the forefinger with the thumb. That makes you a worker, make you handle things, by which you are able to create new situations, develop technologies of various types, all this. So this, as well as the organ of speech, are highly commended in our literature. In fact, my understanding will be that the Jnana Mudra, which is generally given all the gods and sages, that meaning must be only this, that this capacity to oppose thumb to forefinger is uniquely a human capacity. I have seen a film on chimpanzee behavior, long film. Chimpanzees are very intelligent, but they don't have this capacity. They will only hold like this only. They can never hold like this. Then they would have been highly technically efficient. They are not. They do like this only. Man has that capacity. So here, the comparison is given. All the knowledge we began to get after we started capacity to communication. And this communication brought more and more knowledge, more and more experience. And this also made for altering the world outside according to your needs and put us on the road of knowledge and technical efficiency. That is the road. That's called road of civilization. And that can go on at the highest level, spiritual realization itself. That is why Veda includes every knowledge, not only spiritual but also material. Saraswati represents all aspects of knowledge. The carpenter's tools are worshipped during Saraswati Puja. Doctor's stethoscope is worshipped at that time. Everything is Saraswati knowledge. Whether it is physical, non-physical, doesn't make any difference at all. So see the comprehensive attitude of the sages who considered the unity of all knowledge behind the particular pieces of knowledge that we have. So he says here, this idea is, the sages are mentioned here. Bharadwaja, Gautama, then Vishwamitra, Jamadagni, Kashyapa, Vasishtha. These are Atri. These are the 7 Saptarshis they are called. Just like those 7 stars in the sky, they are called Saptarshis. And this is also Saptarshi. We had concept of Saptarshi. That are all here in this body. Saptarshis are there. These are all